Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into the really dynamic and often tumultuous cultural interactions that shaped early America. We're talking about the encounters between Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our mission, really, for this deep dive is to explore how these fundamentally different worldviews, how they clashed, how they adapted, and how that led to both, some surprising exchanges, but also really profound conflicts. It's
Exactly.
a story far richer, much more nuanced than just simple conquest, isn't it? Really laid the foundation of the Americas as we know them.
Precisely. And when we look at these early encounters, it's absolutely critical to understand that it wasn't just about, say, military might or who owned what land, not at first anyway.
Right.
These were confrontations between entire ideological frameworks, deeply held beliefs about how the world worked, how societies should be organized, and even what it meant to be human.
Hmm.
These differences weren't superficial at all. They were foundational to, well, everything that unfolded.
And this is where the layers of complexity truly reveal themselves, isn't it? I mean, our sources immediately highlight how these initial meetings, particularly with the Spanish mission system after 1573,
Mm.
they brought into sharp relief what are described as fundamentally different worldviews.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a minor misunderstanding. It sounds like a profound gulf in perception and belief.
That's spot on. When we examine the Spanish Catholic system encountering various Native American groups, five key areas of divergence, they consistently emerge.
Go.
First, religion. You have Native Americans, many with pantheistic and animistic beliefs. They saw the natural world, rivers, trees, animals, as deeply imbued with spiritual essence.
Uh-huh. Everything's alive with spirit.
Exactly. Every part of creation. The Spanish, conversely, came from a very hierarchical Catholic system centered on a single supreme deity, a rigid church structure. Very different.
Totally different starting point. What's second?
Second, you got to consider gender roles. Many Native American societies operated with matrilineal systems.
Right, so lineage traced through the mother.
Yes. And women frequently held really influential roles in farming, family decisions, even spirituality in some groups.
Okay.
Now, contrast that with the Spanish patriarchal model. Men were the undisputed heads of households, dominating political and public life. Women had significantly fewer public roles. Big contrast.
Future. Okay, third.
Third, family structures. Native societies were often woven together by these extensive kinship networks, extended families, sometimes, 50 to 70 members.
Wow.
That extended network was their core social unit, their economic unit, too. The Spanish, while they certainly valued kinship, their life revolved much more around the nuclear family, parents, and their immediate kids.
Much smaller scale, focused differently.
Right. Fourth, land use. And this was a massive point of contention. It led to endless conflict.
I can imagine.
Native Americans generally believed in the spiritual nature of the land itself. Land wasn't a commodity to be carved up, bought, sold.
Less sacred.
Yeah.
Held in common.
Exactly. A deep, reciprocal relationship between people and the earth. The Spanish, on the other hand, held the firm belief that land existed for private ownership. It could be acquired, exploited, traded as a resource. Total opposite.
Complete opposite. Okay, and the last one, power.
And finally, power.
Yeah.
Many Native American tribes operated through consensus-based leadership or councils. Leaders gained influence through persuasion, wisdom, skill.
Not just because of who their father was.
Right, and not inherent birthright or imposed authority, generally speaking. The Spanish, meanwhile, came from a monarchical, hierarchical system. Power flowed directly from the king down. Authority was imposed through rigid rank, centralized control. Very top-down.
It's just astounding how deeply ingrained these differences were across the board. So, okay, given these incredibly deep-seated philosophical divides, how did these groups actually interact on the ground? Was it just constant conflict from the get-go, or were there moments of, unexpected connection?
Well, interestingly, our sources reveal that despite those fundamental worldviews, there were periods of, well, let's call it mutual misunderstanding that ironically led to some fascinating cultural exchanges.
Okay.
It certainly wasn't always outright war from day one. Both groups, often driven by practical utility, not necessarily a bridging of worldviews, mind you, they adopted aspects of the other's culture they found useful.
Makes sense. Like what?
For instance, Native Americans were incredibly eager to get their hands on European metal tools, knives, axes, pots. They were far more efficient for farming, hunting, daily life than traditional implements.
Yeah, game changer.
Big time. They also quickly integrated European horses and guns, not just for hunting, but significantly for warfare, against other tribes or sometimes against the Europeans themselves.
Right, so these weren't just trinkets. They actually shifted power dynamics.
Absolutely. Revolutionized daily life and tribal power dynamics.
And the Europeans, what were they getting out of it besides land?
Well, they desired access to the incredibly lucrative North American fur trade, beaver pelts especially.
Ah, right, the furs.
So, to secure trading rights and build alliances with different peoples, they often arranged marriages with Native American women. This was a way to forge crucial kinship ties, integrate into existing trade networks, and gain access to those valuable commodities.
So pragmatic alliances, even across these deep divides.
Exactly. This dynamic where deep divides persist even through this kind of cooperation, it offers a critical insight, I think. Historical interactions are often less about ideological convergence and more about pragmatic, sometimes even desperate adaptations for survival or gain. It's a powerful reminder that just sharing space doesn't always mean shared understanding.
Hmm.
These exchanges were less about, mutual respect for worldviews and much more about mutual, often strategic utility.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It really highlights that while they might have traded goods or even, formed marital alliances, the core worldviews often remain distinct. Poles apart, really.
Falls apart.
And that's the crucial point, isn't it? Despite those practical adoptions, the core differences often overshadowed them. And that inevitably led back to profound conflict.
And nowhere is that more evident than in the clash over spirituality, particularly the Spanish priests' fervent efforts to convert Native Americans to Christianity. That often led to a deep, sometimes violent chasm of misunderstanding.
You see this clearly in the Spanish priests' approach, right? Our sources mention that while some conversions did happen, what the priests meant by conversion and what, say, the Pueblo people meant were often completely at odds.
Totally at odds. Christianity, by definition, requires a convert's total devotion, rejection of all other gods.
Exclusive.
Right. But the Pueblo, with their more expansive spiritual vision, they often had no problem bringing Christ into their existing pantheon of gods, basically, worshiping him right alongside their traditional deities.
So adding him to the mix, not replacing everything.
Exactly. And when the priests tried to force that singular exclusive devotion, well, some native groups resisted by keeping their religious practices secret. Others, faced with unrelenting pressure, sometimes chose open violence.
And these acts weren't just isolated incidents, were they?
No, not at all. From the very early Taíno defiance in the Caribbean to the widespread Pueblo revolt in the Southwest, the persistent Maya resistance in Yucatan, a clear pattern emerges.
Which is?
Native peoples fiercely defended their autonomy, their way of life, their beliefs. Each uprising, whether ultimately successful or brutally suppressed, became this powerful testament to their determination against foreign imposition.
Let's talk about some specifics. The Pueblo Revolt, that was huge.
Yeah, the Pueblo Revolt of 1610, present-day New Mexico, the context is crucial. The Pueblo had been under Spanish rule, forced conversion via the mission system for decades.
Okay.
Then they suffered a sustained drought, plus attacks from other native groups like the Apache, and they started to blame the Spanish and their Christ for all these troubles.
Misfortunes piling up.
Right, so under the leadership of Pope, a charismatic Pueblo spiritual leader, they organized, they rose up, killed around 400 Spanish colonizers, priests, settlers, burned all the churches to the ground.
Wow. A coordinated effort.
Very much so. It was a major victory for the Pueblo. Kicked the Spanish out entirely for a time. Though it's important to note, the Spanish did reconquer the territory about 12 years later, but still a huge assertion of sovereignty.
A clear act of reclaiming religious and political control. And we see similar fierce defense elsewhere. You mentioned Yucatan.
Yes, the Cupel Uprising of 1546. This involved Maya peoples in the Cupel province of Yucatan. Again, the spark was Spanish demands for tribute, forced labor.
Economic exploitation.
Exactly. And alongside that, deep anger over the destruction of sacred Maya religious icons, idols, temples.
Something central to their worldview.
Absolutely. So native Maya leaders organized a wide-scale rebellion, attacked Spanish settlements, missionaries. It was eventually suppressed, but it powerfully demonstrated the Mayas' continued resistance decades after the initial conquest, especially resistance over religious and economic imposition.
It shows it wasn't a done deal after the first wave of conquest.
Not at all. And another example, the Mixton War, 1540 to 1542 in western Mexico. This involved Caxcan people and other indigenous groups.
Yeah, the triggers.
Very similar. Spanish demands for tribute, labor, forced religious conversion.
Yeah.
Indigenous warriors fortified mountain strongholds, fought fiercely against Spanish troops.
So organized military resistance.
Yes, this one was eventually crushed by a large Spanish force led by the Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza himself. But even in defeat, it underscored the limits of Spanish power at the time and the unwavering willingness of native groups to defend their autonomy, the whole way of life. These weren't just random acts of violence, they were organized, often desperate attempts to preserve their worldviews.
And even earlier, the Taino, the very first people Columbus encountered.
Right, the Taino Rebellion starting around 1495 and continuing in various forms. Initially, relations were apparently somewhat friendly, but that changed fast.
How so?
The Spanish imposed the encomienda system, brutal exploitation, enslavement, violence. Disease also ravaged the population.
The encomienda. That's the system where colonists got control over native labor.
Yes, in exchange for supposedly converting them, in reality it was often closer to slavery. So a major rebellion broke out in 1495, led by leaders like Caonabo. It was brutally suppressed, but acts of resistance continued for years.
A tragic early example.
One of the earliest examples of native resistance to European colonization in the Americas, yes. Though ultimately disease, war, and enslavement led to a massive, catastrophic depopulation of the Taino.
It's just devastating.
Yeah.
But these acts of resistance, from the Taino to the Pueblo to the Maya, they powerfully highlight this fierce determination you mentioned, defending sovereignty, economic ways of life, religious beliefs, even gender relations.
Absolutely. They were fighting for their entire world.
Now, with this kind of brutality and this persistent resistance reaching the ears of leaders back in Europe, it raises an important question. How did European religious and political leaders actually grapple with the morality of it all? The conquests, the treatment of non-Europeans. Did they just ignore it?
That's a fascinating part of the story. No, they didn't entirely ignore it. News of the brutality, especially reports from outspoken priests like Montesinos and later Las Casas, did reach Spain.
Okay.
And it prompted King Charles himself to convene a group, priests, philosophers, legal scholars, to actually debate the moral and legal fallout of the Spanish conquest in the Americas. This wasn't just a minor court discussion, it was a major formal debate.
A formal debate about the morality of conquest. Who are the key voices?
Well, one prominent voice was Juan Yanez de Sepulveda. He robustly argued for Spanish conquest.
On what grounds?
He essentially argued based on the perceived inferiority and backward nature of the Indians. He claimed conquest was actually beneficial for them.
Beneficial.
He argued it brought them the supposed riches of Western civilization, and crucially for the time, the light of Christianity. He drew on Aristotelian ideas of natural slavery, suggesting some peoples were naturally suited to be ruled by others.
Oh, okay, so that's one side. Who argued against that?
The most powerful counter-voice was Bartolomé de las Casas, a priest who had actually spent years among the Indians, initially as an encomendero himself, before having a profound change of heart.
Right, he became their chief defender.
Exactly. De las Casas argued passionately, fiercely, that if Spain continued on this path of brutalizing and killing native peoples, well, first, their souls would be lost to God, and second, any survivors would grow to hate Christianity because of the actions of the Spanish colonizers.
A powerful argument from experience.
Very powerful. He relentlessly documented the atrocities and argued against the injustice and brutality of the forced labor encomienda system. He saw it as fundamentally unchristian and counterproductive to genuine conversion.
His arguments sound incredibly progressive for the time, defending the humanity of Native Americans.
They were in many ways. He argued for their rationality, their capacity for civilization, and Christianity. However, this brings us to a really uncomfortable paradox, doesn't it?
What's the paradox?
De las Casas, this tireless champion for Native Americans, reportedly suggested that Africans replace Native Americans in the forced labor systems.
Oh, wow. That's jarring.
It is. It's a profound moral inconsistency that our sources highlight. While advocating quite radically for his time for one oppressed group, he seems to have inadvertently, or perhaps callously, contributed to the horrific suffering of another.
And that tragically is exactly what happened, isn't it? The Spanish and other European powers increasingly turned to the transatlantic slave trade, burdening Africans with brutal enslaved labor across the Americas.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder of how complex these historical moments are, and how even figures seen as reformers can be entangled in the injustices of their time, sometimes with devastating consequences.
So, despite that profound misstep regarding Africans, did De las Casas' advocacy have any positive impact for Native Americans? Were there reforms?
Yes, his arguments, along with others from Catholic reformers, were influential. They contributed to the creation of the New Laws of 1542.
New laws. What did they try to do?
Well, they aimed to abolish native enslavement outright. They also attempted to phase out the encomienda system over time.
Phase it out.
They limited the power of the Spanish encomenderos. Crucially, they ended the hereditary nature of the encomiendas, meaning these grants of labor and tribute couldn't just be passed down from father to son indefinitely. The idea was they would revert to the crown upon the death of the current holder.
Okay, so attempts at real reform on paper,
Mm.
but how well were they enforced?
That's the catch. Enforcement was remarkably weak. Spanish colonists in the Americas, whose wealth and power often depended on the encomienda, largely resisted these laws, sometimes violently.
So the Crown made laws in Spain, but enforcing them across the Atlantic against powerful local interests was another matter entirely.
Exactly. Colonial reality often trumped royal decrees. While the new laws represented a shift in official policy influenced by moral arguments, their practical impact on the ground was unfortunately quite limited in many areas for a long time.
So we see this incredibly complex moral landscape. You have debates in Spain, genuine attempts at reform by some, horrific justifications for exploitation by others,
Yeah.
and all the while, the consequences play out thousands of miles away, often with unintended and devastating impacts, particularly for Africans who became the primary targets of mass enslavement.
It really is a testament to the messy reality of history. How good intentions, bad intentions, economic drivers, religious beliefs, and deeply ingrained worldviews all collide.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What this deep dive really shows us, I think, is that these early encounters were not just about simple conquest, not by a long shot. They were a profound clash of entire worldviews, cultural, religious, social. They led to periods of mutual, maybe pragmatic adaptation. Certainly fierce resistance from native peoples defending their ways of life, and even these intense internal debates among Europeans that would go on to shape centuries of history, law, and thought.
And as you reflect on all this, maybe consider how these foundational encounters, defined by attempts to understand or dominate or resist, how they continue to echo today. Think about our modern understanding of cultural identity, land ownership, sovereignty, even the very concept of human rights. What lessons do you draw about how radically different worldviews navigate shared spaces? And what happens when those fundamental perspectives truly collide? Something to think about.